Hey guys, I'm back with a new video. In this video, let us learn about events in JavaScript. Now the concept of events comes into picture when you want to run some code upon occurrence of certain events. Now this could be on the click of a button. So let me show you this. The event could get fired on the click of a button. So we are having a button element. If you click on it, the click event gets raised on hovering over some element. So suppose you have defined some element or some boundary. If your cursor goes within the boundary region, a hover event will get raised. Okay. Then we have something called as a drag drop event and many other tons of events that can trigger some code to run. Now for this series, we'll focus on events in the context of the browser environment. Now we have a couple of events we can listen to, like a click on a button, a cut and copy event, a drag and drop event. And in JavaScript, we have the event constructor function with some of the core functionalities defined inside it that are common between all the events that we will learn about. And then all other specialized events like click event, drag event, they are based on the global event constructor function. So back in my Visual Studio Code, you can see we are having an index.html file. And here what I've done is I've defined a button and some simple styles for rendering the button. So let us see our markup getting rendered in the browser. So we are getting the text events in JavaScript and a button. Okay. So let us understand the two different ways of listening to events on the button that we are having in the markup. So first what I will do is I will define an on-click attribute on our button. Now this was the traditional way we used to attach event listeners on our elements. But even then, let us see how it works. So back in my Visual Studio Code, I will go on the button and attach an on-click attribute. So on-click, and on the click of event, I want to trigger a certain piece of code that will say console.log, in single quotes, got clicked. And let us go back to the browser to see if it works well or not. So if I click on the button, you can see it says got clicked. Okay, so this is how we can define a click event using the traditional approach of attaching a listener on our element. But I would not recommend you to use this way of listening to events because it makes your code very tough to maintain, and this is also polluting our markup because we are now suddenly having a piece of JavaScript code in our HTML markup. Even though we have a JavaScript file events.js where we can define our listeners, this is definitely a bad approach. So the better way of listening to events is by registering the events. Okay, so in our JavaScript file instead and not in the markup, and with that we come to addEventListener. Okay, this is the second way of attaching a listener on our elements. So what we can do here is we can grab the element from the DOM using the query selector, and we can store the reference in a variable, and on that reference we can use the addEventListener method to define the code that should be performed based on a certain event. So what we need to do is we'll first reach out to this button element and we will attach the event listener, the click event listener, and then we will trigger some code when the click event happens. So let us go back to the events.js file, and what I will do is I will grab the button using the query selector. So const button document query selector, and I will say button. Okay, so we can say now this addEventListener method takes two arguments. Okay, so let me show you this. So button dot addEventListener, so it takes the type of event that you're working with and then a listener. Okay, so the one is the event name, which is a string, and the second argument is the function that should be executed when the click event happens. So what we need to do is first I will attach an event listener, and the method that should get triggered, I will name that as So on the click event, I want to trigger the handle click function. So it should run once the click event is triggered. So button.addEventListener on the click event, just trigger the hand click method. Okay. So let us define the hand click method. So I will say const handle click, and this will receive an event object. Okay. So what I will do is, let us log the event object to the console, and let us go back to the browser to see the output. So let us click on the button because our button is having the listener for the click event. Click on it. So you can see we are getting mouse event. Now if you can see that we are getting a mouse event, you can see we have a bunch of properties and methods defined on the event object. Okay. Now one property I would like to show you is the target property, which describes what element in the end caused the event. So let us go back to our Visual Studio Code and let us change event and write event.target. Okay, go back to the browser and again click on the button. You can see we are getting the element which is the target. So in this case, the button is the target. And one thing more, let us remove the traditional way of defining this. I will comment this out just for future reference, and I will say button and say click. Okay, so let us go back to the browser and let us try the code. Okay, so we are getting the button each time we click. So this is the target for our event. So using the target property, you can get the direct access to the element on which the event took place, and then you can work with it. So now let us do one more thing. Now with this, we have now set up an event listener, and if you now want to remove the event listener, we have a method called as remove event listener, which does exactly what it sounds. It will remove the event listener from the element, or you can unregister the event listener. So let us do that. Let us go back to our Visual Studio Code. So I will leave a comment here, register and event listener. For the click event, unregister the event listener for the click event on the button, of course. So I will say button dot remove event listener. So what event we are targeting? Here we are targeting the click event, and I want to remove the event listener, which is handle click. And this remove event listener, as you can see, it takes an argument which defines the event for which you want to remove the event listener, which is the click event in this case. And then the second argument can be the function which you registered as the event listener, which in this case is handle click. So to sum it up, you can register multiple event listeners and also remove event listeners from the element as and when required. Okay, so let us see if it works or not. So if I click on the button, you can see the event listener got removed. It is not working at all. Okay, so let us proceed further. Now let us learn about yet another event which is called as the mouse move event. So what I will do is, the mouse move event actually gets triggered when you move your mouse within the boundaries of an element. Okay, it's just like the hover event. So a particular element on which that event is registered, whenever you will hover or you will move your cursor within the boundaries of the element, that event will get triggered. Now also the event objects records various properties about the event when it is getting fired at every instant, just like we saw in the context of the click event. So let us see how we can define a mouse move event. So go back to my Visual Studio Code, and now I will work with the mouse move event. So mouse move event. So I will say button dot add event listener. I'm interested in mouse move event, and I will say handle mouse enter. And now what I will do is I will define a handler function for this. So I will say function handle mouse enter. And here also we will get the event object because the event object got raised when this event occurred. So as I told you that the event object records certain properties about the event when it is getting fired at every instant. So what I will do is I will log event.clientX and client.Y, the position where the event first occurred. So I will say console.log event.clientX and console.log event.client.Y. Okay, and we have already removed the click listener, so it will not get fired. Only the mouse over event should get fired. So let us mouse over or hover over the click button. You can see it is getting fired continuously. Okay, so and we are getting logged the client X, the X coordinate of your client with respect to the button, and the Y coordinate, okay, where you first hovered on the button. So now let me remove the event listener as well for the mouse move event. So let us go back to the browser and I will unregister the event listener, which is the mouse move event. So button.addEventListener, and I will say mouse move event. And okay, so it's not add event listener, remove event listener, and I will say handle mouse enter. And let us go back to the browser to see if it works or not. So if I hover over the click element, you can see we are not getting the logs to the console. So our mouse move event just got unregistered from the element. So this is how we can work with the mouse move event. So now we have various other events for mouse as well. You can learn more about events from the MDN documentation. The link for that can be found down below. Now let us learn about some events that you can apply on the window object. Again, you can learn more from the MDN docs, but for now let us go briefly over them. So what I will do is I will register an event listener on the window object that we have discussed in one of the starting videos of the series. So I will say okay, so I will say window, so adding, not adding, I will say registering an event listener on the window object. So I will say window dot add event listener, and I will target for an event on the window object called as the DOM content loaded, which is basically used to check whether the web page has loaded completely or not. Now this event gets executed once your HTML document gets completely loaded and has been completely parsed from top to bottom. Now this event doesn't wait for the completion of the loading of the add-ons such as your CSS files or your remote images that you can fetch from some CDN. So I'll say window.addEventListener DOM content loaded, and I will call the Initialize App method or function, you can say. So I will say function Initialize App, and I will log to the console the application got initialized and setup is now done. And I will again make a log and I will say loaded. Now let us go back to the browser to see if this log occurs in the console or not. So on the very first load of our HTML document, when it got parsed completely, you can see we are getting these two logs because the window did listen for the DOM content loaded events, and once the DOM content gets completely loaded, these two logs pertaining to the event listener which we defined, which is the Initialize App, they got triggered. Okay, so we also have one more event on the window object which is called as the load event that checks for complete loading and parsing of the HTML document, including the add-ons. Okay, so it will look for the CSS files as well. So it will wait for the complete loading of the doc of the HTML document, including the CSS files as well, which is not the case with the DOM content loaded. And then we have a bunch of other events on the window object as well. You can learn about all these events from the MDN docs, and you can pretty much apply all these events on any DOM element. Now let us discuss about the submit event now that we can work with in case of the form element. So form we know is basically, let me go back to the Visual Studio Code. Now we know that a form is basically like this, where we have certain input fields defined. So say name, username, uname, or you can say password, and then we have a button to basically submit all the details to a remote server. So a form element, it's basically a set of input fields where we provide some information with a button, and you will submit the details to some remote server when you click on the submit button, and a submit event will get raised and some code will get triggered to basically reach out to server, or you make a async call to the server and submit the required data. So let me go back to my HTML file and create a simple HTML form just for the demonstration purpose of this event. So what I will do is I will define a form. So okay, so what I will do is I will close this and go to my index.html file, and here down the button I will define a form element. So just remove the action attribute here, and I will say label for, I will say name, then define an input element. Input type is text, ID will be name, then I will define a button. I'm using just one input field just for the demonstration purpose. So button type is submit, so I will say register for the concert. Okay, now let us go back to the browser to see what we are getting. Okay, so we are getting an input field and the button. Okay, so let us see what we can do with the form element now. So first what we need to do is we need to get or reach out to the form element, and then we will see what we can do with this. So with the submit event we can work with, in case of the form element, so the form, as you already know, is a set of input fields, and you can see we are getting a dummy form that just got created, and let us write a name here. So I will write a name here and register for the consort. Okay, so you can see that the page got reloaded when you click on the submit button. So what you saw was that the page got reloaded. The reason for the reload of the page is that the default behavior in case of the form submission, when the button gets clicked, is to send the form data to your remote server which serves this page. Now oftentimes you will need to validate the input fields before submitting the data to the server. Now we want to prevent the default behavior of the browser, which in this case is form submission. So what I will do is I will go back to my events.js file, and let us first select the form element using the query selector. So const form document query selector and the form element. Now we have got the reference for the form element. Now on the form that we just grabbed from the DOM as the reference, you need to register an event listener, and we'll listen for the submit event. And this event is only present on forms and not on any other DOM element. So I will say form.addEventListener, and I'm listening for the submit event, and I will log the event to the console. So console.log event. And if I now go back to the browser and let us type a name here, so say Alex, and register for the concert. Now you can see that for a brief moment of time we had the event object logged to the console, okay, and then it vanished. Again, see this, we had the event object for a brief momentarily point of time, we had the event object logged to the console, then it vanished. But once the form got submitted to the remote server, the page got reloaded and the event was gone, so we didn't got any log. Now to basically handle this out, the event object exposes a method called as the prevent default, which will prevent the default behavior of the form submission by the browser. So I would say, come here and say event.prevent the default behavior, so we say prevent default. And if I now go back to the browser and again submit and register for the concert, you can see we are getting this log to the console and the page did not got reloaded. Okay, so you can see that the event persists and we are getting it logged to the console. Now this prevents the form submission, which we will have to handle on our own, which we'll see later when we discuss about HTTP and async calls. So this was a brief overview of JavaScript events. Now in the next video I will discuss about some very important concepts such as event capturing, event bubbling, and event delegation before we start with asynchronous JavaScript. So if you like the video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the very next video.